Hello. That sat lower than I thought. Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Haven. I'm going to be your crash course instructor today, and you're about to learn a lot about philosophy and the study of emotions. Let's get into it. I don't have time to waste. It's 2 a.m. I'm ready to go to bed. By now, we should all be well aware that a big part of studying philosophy is the search for fundamental truths about the world and about life. So I beg the question, what are the fundamental truths about emotions? Where do they come from? How do they impact us? Why do we have emotions? What are emotions? Let's talk about it. At this point in time, emotions have become a very large part of our day-to-day lives, especially in the focus of philosophy. If we're going to talk about what emotions are, we should probably look at some of the greatest contributors to the theories on emotions in Western philosophies, and of course that would be Plato, Aristotle, and Hobbes. Much like in the Pixar movie Inside Out, these philosophers believed that emotions played a large role in driving our day-to-day lives and influencing our behaviors. I know a lot of you are probably already on the edge of your seat, so let me just keep the ball rolling and lead into where these emotions come from. Now, to understand the theories about where emotions come from, we have to look at the traditions of emotions. Now, I'm not talking about traditions as in putting up a Christmas tree or getting absolutely wasted on New Year's. No, I'm talking about traditions as in different ideas that have been created through the study of emotions through time. There are 3 main traditions on general emotions that were discussed in this particular reading, and the first one that we're going to talk about today is the feeling tradition. This theory, in short, states that the way emotions feel is their most significant characteristic, and this tradition defines emotions as conscious experiments, which, if I understand correctly, is like, I'm choosing to be angry because I think it's going to help me in this situation. The evaluative tradition regards how emotions interpret the world as primary and emotions as feelings caused by eliciting circumstances. The final tradition is the motivational tradition, which says that emotions are distinctive motivational states. So just like many cultures around the world have a variety of holiday traditions, the same goes for emotions. These philosophers broke down emotions into different categories. We've got occurrence, disposition, and short and long-lived emotions. To provide a few examples, an example of occurrence emotions would be panic. An example of disposition would be hostility, and short or long-lived emotions would be anger or grief. We can all have a different idea of how things feel and how these feelings can be articulated and analyzed, which leads me to my final question, closing us out by asking how emotions impact us. This question does not have one concrete right or wrong answer, and by turning to earlier history and research, we can see that the answer to this question has many parts, all of which have changed over time. But to put it vaguely, we're all impacted by similar experiences in a variety of ways. So now that we have a pretty good understanding of what Aristotle, Hobbes, and Plato have to say about emotions, let's jump on over to Chinese philosophy to see what they have to say about emotions. Stay with me, y'all. We'll be right back after this short ad. Just kidding, we're diving right in. In Chinese philosophy, emotions are not limited to only subjective feelings or irrational urges of passions that disrupt our thinking. In Chinese philosophy, emotions are seen as interactive and responsive with shaping how someone views the world and how people respond to certain stimuli, such as big events that happen in our lives. To understand this idea further, I have to talk to you guys about something called Qing. Qing is an important aspect when it comes to understanding the question of what emotions are in Chinese philosophy. Now, there are many different ways to describe Qing in many different contexts, but one way to define it is the affective states of the mind, and these states help us to better understand emotions and the subjective feelings. Shut up, I've had a lot of caffeine and I'm on a roll. Chinese philosophy's interpretation of emotions looks at the external world that affects us, but also our own agency that we still have in relation to our emotions. Emotions are considered interactive, perceptual, cognitive, motivational, affective states of the mind. So essentially, emotions are a combination of our inner selves and the outside world that we interact with every day. In early Chinese philosophy, there were 7 emotional values that men were assumed to have inherently at birth. We got joy, anger, sadness, fear, love, disliking, and liking. That means that they have these emotions after they're born and they don't have to learn these emotions from the outside. The idea of Qing, however, disagrees with this interpretation of emotion because in this case, it refers to something that really genuinely is not what it appears to be. It says emotions are partially the inner state, or what we're born with, and partially the objective state of affairs. So our many emotions are shaped by the outside world because we learn how to act appropriately and adjust our emotions to the society we live in compared to the worldly response of Qing. So how did Chinese philosophers think that emotions impacted individuals? While during the Warring States period, many different views arose about how emotions were impactful to humans. First, the Analects of Confucius covers the true virtue coming out of a genuine affective state of mind. Your emotions should reflect the affective genuineness that appears from the essence of humanity. True emotions will only be seen when you have the right, genuine state of mind. Mosey, on the other hand, argues that our inner self-centered emotions cause world problems such as poverty and war. We become biased by our own self-interest. Mencius, an inheritor of the Confucianism ideology, he focuses on emotions that are triggered by spontaneous psychological orientations of the mind, such as the immediate pity we feel when we see someone suffering. You feel this, right? Zunzi also says that our emotions are formed based on, obviously, what goes on in our mind, and the mind interacts deeply with the external world, so do emotions. Laozi believes that the emotions we experience throughout our lives have a lasting impact on our behavior. So when we experience many negative emotions, this will in turn impact our well-being and social relations. Lastly, Zhuangzi believed that emotions are uncontrollable and come and go like natural phenomena such as wind, rain, and thunder, like the bipolar weather of Oklahoma. That was a dad joke. My classmate wrote that in the script. Zhuangzi basically believed that there's no lasting impact on our behavior. All of these different philosophers help provide different answers as to how emotions impact people. And as we learn, we can form our own opinions based on the values that we resonate the most with. Next, we're going to talk about Christian emotions. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Gotcha again. Yes, our third topic is going to be Christian emotions. What is it, you may ask? Well, one theory that is very popular among Christian philosophers is essentialism. Essentialism basically says that there exists a universal religious emotion and that there's one feature that makes emotions properly religious. Religious emotions are different than secular emotions based on their content. But, of course, this is just one view that the authors explore. Religious emotions, in a sense, are distinctive from the teachings of the said religion. It's kind of up in the air about what it is exactly, but we can talk about where it comes from. One philosopher believes that everyone feels dependence and freedom. Not the kind where you depend on your parents as a kid and then finally get freedom as an adult, or as a teenager if you didn't have Baptist parents like me. Dependence is receptivity. Things in the world affecting you, such as the wind blowing over your ice cream. Freedom is related to activity. It's how we affect the world through the life that we build here. This theory of philosophy believed in absolute dependence. Absolute dependence is viewing yourself and the world as a unit and feeling powerless to the great beyond and unable to change it. As to where it comes from, many theories include a higher power, such as God. So why does that matter to us? How does it affect us? Well, religious emotions are concluded to be important because they express a character to the way that things are, and they're ethical indicators of ethical values. They explore both internal and external themes. All in all, Christian emotions act as a moral compass. Hang on to that idea of freedom because it's also important in the Indian philosophies, but it's not called freedom, it's called liberation. Same kind of deal, we'll talk about the difference in just 1 second, let's keep it moving. We're gonna discuss the Indian interpretations, and yes, interpretations because plural. I love saying amongst Indian philosophy, there are a variety of ways that emotions are believed to be. In this video, for the purpose of time, I'm gonna go over 5. The first account is called this. I really just don't want to butcher this. It's in Sanskrit. So for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to refer to this as the NV account. In the NV account, there's a clear distinction between emotion and cognition. This relates to the idea that there is both a material and an immaterial version of oneself. Certain emotions like attachment and aversion are seen as impurities of oneself. This is because feelings are seen as attachment to the world, which in turn is an obstacle for the path of achieving liberation. Next is the Vedanta account, which focuses on the idea that a person's own self is separate from the mental functions of the mind. So the old Western philosophy, I think this might be Plato, but I could be wrong and I'll look it up later, but it's like you think with your head and you feel with your heart. That's basically what this theory is putting forward. Emotion and cognition are distinctly separate. The only difference in the Indian account is that both cannot be independent of each other like the Western account believes. Both this account and the NV account agree that the true self, and by extension, true knowledge, is devoid of emotions. In a sense, in the Vedanta account, emotions are merely obstacles of ignorance that stop us from achieving liberation. The third Indian account that I'm going to discuss is the Samkhya Yoga account, which has no distinction between feelings and cognition. This outlines a clear theory that cognition is considered a material part of being, along with emotion. In contrast, Western philosophy would see cognition as an immaterial part of the mind. An important thing to remember that sets the Samkhya Yoga account apart from the others is that emotion is not seen as the opposite to rational thinking. In this one, rational thinking is just as important of an obstacle to overcome to achieve liberation. The final two accounts that I'm going to discuss in Indian philosophies actually fall under one umbrella, which is the Buddhist philosophies. Buddhist philosophers did not believe in the existence of the self. Instead, they believed in a non-physical chain of consciousness or chain of cognitions that follows us through reincarnations. It's called Santa Vijnana, I think. This idea states that the chain of cognitions is beginningless and endless. Cognition is eternal. The Buddhists really believe that emotions go hand in hand with our past life experiences. A Buddhist philosopher named Suntarakshita explores the idea that emotions such as love exist beyond the physical world and follow us through reincarnation. Because Suntarakshita believed emotions were learned through experience, he believed any instinctual emotions were a result of experiencing it in a past life. Suntarakshita might argue that love and hatred are a part of the chain of cognition because they're derived from past lives and are fundamental to our human experience. So, just a quick recap before I end the video. We've got our general emotions, Christian emotions, Chinese philosophies on emotions, and Indian philosophies on emotions. The general emotions includes the three traditions: the feeling tradition, the evaluated tradition, and the motivational tradition. These traditions were put forth by Western philosophers such as Hobbes, Aristotle, and Plato, and they all work together to create different types of emotions such as occurrence and disposition. If you recall, one of the traditions that I discussed was the feeling tradition, which was the idea that emotions are conscious experiments. Well, the well-known philosophers that put forth the feeling tradition may have some opposing philosophers as history has unfolded. For example, the James Lange theory proposes that when we perceive that we're in danger, for example, the perception directly sets off a collection of bodily responses, and our awareness of these responses is what constitutes fear. James thus maintained that our feeling of bodily changes as they occur is the emotion. Now, if you recall, in Chinese philosophy, emotions are seen as interactive in shaping how we view the world and how we respond to external stimuli. Early Chinese philosophy believed that emotions were inherent and we got them at birth, and more modern Chinese philosophy believes that it is a combination of both the inner self and the outside world. Now, the Chinese philosophies on emotions considered all of these views as separate possibilities of explaining emotions. However, instead of looking at all of these views separately, we propose that they should be viewed together. As Ching also says, emotions can be interpreted very differently in many different situations. We are able to go through multiple of these different views that are put forth that all contribute equally to how we experience our emotions, or unequally. Think back to our race talk unit. Emotions are also things that cannot be defined as one thing, but rather needs a pluralistic explanation. Yeah, maybe we're born with certain emotions, but our environment influences how we show them. Christian emotions mainly focused on the topic of essentialism, which holds the view that there is some universal religious emotion. The religious philosopher Friedrich S. believed that religion at its core was piety, which included feeling absolute dependence. All humans feel dependence and freedom. Absolute dependence, as mentioned earlier, is acknowledging the world, including yourself, as a unit and feeling powerless to the absolute beyond. Friedrich believes this concept is an essentially religious element to emotions like gratitude, joy, and sorrow, and without it, they wouldn't be religious at all. Religious emotions are concluded to be important because they provide a character for the way things are. The authors of this article's critique on absolute dependence was spot on. This concept does not account for God being able to affect or have an effect on the people in the world. This seems contradictory to many interactions God has with people in the Bible, such as answering prayers, causing the flood. Several Indian philosophers disagreed on where emotions came from because, of course, that depended on whether or not they viewed emotions and cognition as one and the same or distinctly separate. As we discussed the 5 different accounts, they believe differently about that. Overall, there is a theme of liberation, and a lot of times emotion was viewed as an obstacle for the path of liberation. One of the accounts that I discussed was the Samkhya Yoga account, which provided no distinction between emotion and cognition and viewed them both as material. All of these different ideas on what emotion actually is imply that emotion is determined partly by social and cultural factors. For example, if you're someone who believes in reincarnation and you believe that you're stuck with the same soul for all of eternity, there's nothing selfish about trying to understand that soul. But maybe you hold a belief that the soul and the self are two different things, and you must be free from the self to understand the soul. Thanks to modern neuroscience research, we know that emotions and cognition cannot exist separately. Of course, that's just my understanding because I'm quoting Western science. But in non-Western scientific studies, such as the studies of Buddhism, those studies may suggest that trauma lives in the body because of our past life experiences, and emotions like love are reincarnated throughout eternity. So emotion itself can be experienced differently by somebody in a different culture. Hopefully throughout this video, you stayed awake and you've managed to gain a pretty good understanding of what emotions are, where they come from, and how they impact us. I discussed 4 different articles, and that's all I've got for you today. I don't have anything more. I'm ready to go to sleep. Good luck on the Kahoot, and nobody look at me because I'm sure I'm very embarrassed watching myself right now. Okay, bye.